H1051 by Shipley of Van Buren.
Chair recognizes Representative Shipley for opening remarks on Amendment 1051.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Iowa House, I am offering this amendment because I believe it's very important to explore the relationship between policy and psychological trauma in children. As it's known in policy circles and here in the Iowa House, adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, is a formative influence on a person's overall psychology. It is argued human psychology is developed and formed by the various traumas a person incurs, especially in childhood. Essentially, a child incurs a trauma. Life moves on, the trauma is forgotten, but the pain and the suffering from the event is internalized and is brought forward in a person's life day after day, long into adulthood. A lot of social and personal hardship can be explained through the proper analysis of childhood trauma. Thankfully, science is teaching us that trauma can be healed through forgiveness, love, appreciation, gratitude, a healthy dose of vitamins, probably, entheogens, definitely. Other established clinical protocols give us great hope. But what if we as a body can craft policy that protects our children from unwanted adverse childhood experiences in the first place? And my thought here is that if we can prevent the trauma from incurring, it will save a lot of deep emotional healing work on the back end. And I believe this is a great lens to analyze everything that we debate in this chamber. So my goal with this amendment is to ensure that no school policy will create psychological trauma or adverse childhood experience. And I want to share a few stories that I've heard from Iowans on the topic of mandatory masking policies in schools. And I would ask the body to please follow along and maybe consider how traumatic these experiences can be for a young child. Finnegan, 4 years old, preschool, developed a condition around his eyes, puffy swelling. They initially believed it was a sty. The condition worsened, and thankfully, Finnegan was able to get immediate medical attention. The diagnosis: paraorbital cellulitis from wearing a mask, breathing normal mouth bacteria up through his mask, and the bacteria entering his eyes and sinuses. Left untreated, this could have traveled right up into his brain and turned into meningitis. After his antibiotics was up, his medical exemption expired, he returned to school, and within hours, the cellulitis returned. This story does have a happy ending. In the end, he hasn't had to wear a mask in more than a month, and the swelling in his face has not returned. Olivia, 6 years old, started developing rashes around her face last October. She was prescribed ointment. Unfortunately, the rash never healed. After 5 visits, 2 different doctors, they finally decided wearing the mask was preventing the rash from healing and could potentially lead to more serious bacterial infection. So the doctors offered a medical exemption from the mask policy. When Olivia returned to school, being medically exempt from wearing a mask, she was forced to isolate, sit by herself in the corner, not interact with children at recess or in school. She was being ostracized for her medical condition as if she was diseased. Anyone who studied childhood trauma knows what happens next. Olivia is now entirely withdrawn from life, and getting her to even interact with her parents is a tough negotiation because, quote, nobody likes her. Ariel, a 10th grader, adolescent young woman, has asthma, would qualify for medical exemption, but the peer pressure, she says, is so immense, she simply doesn't feel safe exercising her medical exemption. So she decides to endure difficult breathing and also mentions the threat of quarantine is also keeping her compliant. And this quarantine element is also peculiar because I've heard stories of children weaponizing the forced quarantine aspect of this COVID and using it against other children as a bullying tactic. I know that's a different discussion, but again, just revealing how these policies can be abused. And children being mean is such a huge source of adverse childhood experience. Maybe now I'll just take a moment to forgive myself and release from any personal trauma that I've incurred or inflicted or been a part of, and hopefully stand here as a full, healthy psychological being. But I offer this amendment today to empathize with this 10th grade young woman, empathize with the immense pressure and powerful forces tearing apart her emotional and physical health. Jana, a mother from Altoona, writes me, my 5th grader asks me about once a week to get the mask rule changed. He hates wearing it, and especially in PE. When he takes it down to get fresh air, he gets yelled at. He doesn't even get a mask break. I hate seeing the emotional toll it's taking on all 3 of my children, and I wish I could fix it. If I could afford a private school where masks aren't required, I would have already pulled them. Sorry, I should have conveyed that more neutrally with my tone of voice, but very interesting that she says if she could afford a private school where masks aren't required, she already would have made that decision. One last example of what I consider to be childhood trauma, just to demonstrate the urgency of this discussion. Zach is in kindergarten. Zach had pneumonia as a baby and has a tough time strengthening his lungs. Zach will come home from school coughing with bloodshot eyes, makes mom very concerned, but not wearing a mask would result in devastating social isolation that we previously discussed in the instance of Olivia. So I could go on with these examples, and I probably really should, because I think these are traumas that are incurring as we speak. I hope it's appropriate now to just express my deep appreciation for Governor Reynolds and her leadership on this topic, especially the connection that she explicitly made to the social, emotional, mental health of Iowans. So I'm really thankful that our governor and her wisdom has taken that leadership, but not everyone has recognized or kept up to date on the cutting edge of the science here. So, like I said, I could go on. The last thing I want to do is just be someone here who just repeats the same point over and over. But can we please just have some compassion for these children? Must we really view them solely as vectors of disease? Can we please view these children as emotional beings that must be nurtured and supported, to appreciate their beautiful smiles? Those are my opening remarks. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Dolachek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I sympathize with your passion, Representative Shipley, but I would question on whether this amendment is germane to the bill.
Representative Dolachek, your point is well taken. The amendment is not germane.